What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Nioh, the 2017 Souls-like from Team Ninja that saw a very successful release before ultimately releasing a sequel in 2020. But as a channel that covers the occasional Souls-like, people will often ask me to cover this and its sequel, which obviously I'm finally getting around to. Though, as a PC channel, there are a few things to note in terms of this game in particular, as its original release in 2017 was for the PlayStation. It was later in 2017, towards the end of the year, ported to PC, but it was not done particularly well, let's say. One of the biggest problems is that all of the button prompts that you'll be given in-game are hard-coded as controller options, meaning that it is not possible to change them. So if you want to play this on PC with a keyboard and mouse, like I do with every Souls-like, despite the many people that will in the comments tell me to use a controller, I will not. The biggest hurdle in that regard is simply memorizing which keys do what, as the button prompts are of zero use. Beyond that, though, as a 2017 game, it is running very well. But Nioh is an interesting game just from a development standpoint, because work originally began all the way back in 2004 before going through several iterations, obviously, over the course of 13 years, with the only thing being left from the original iteration consisting of the main character and the setting itself. But I would imagine some of the complications of that development time are to blame for the very disjointed story. Now, I've played other games by Team Ninja, most recently Wolong Fallen Dynasty, which has a similar way of handling its narrative, but in Nioh it is especially poorly presented. And while I think the game will ultimately get a pass for that, simply because these kinds of games are more about the gameplay than the story specifically, I bring it up with Nioh because while you have Souls-likes that have a more mysterious narrative, if you will, it's usually consistent in its presentation, whereas here, when we go to start a mission, we'll often be given a sort of text that explains the premise of what we're about to do, but then you'll meet all sorts of characters and there will be cutscenes that will bring up information that has not been presented to you. And then only after those things will a codex entry be added that then gives you the context, which is especially frustrating. But beyond those things, the game itself is set in the Sengoku period of Japan, though towards the very end of it in about 1600. We play as a set character, so no character creation anything, but we play as William, who, after acting as a pirate to help the Queen of England secure a magical substance known as Amrita that enables magical abilities to help her fight a war, we manage to escape and make our way to Japan after tracking down someone who stole our guardian spirit, which has been with us since we were a child. Though it is worth mentioning that while obviously this is a fantastical interpretation of events, many of the events we see are interpretations of historical events and figures, which is an interesting touch with these types of games. So overall, while the narrative is confusing, I'm still kind of enjoying it. Now, the big showcase for Nioh is, of course, its Souls-like combat, and an interesting thing about, I would say, both Nioh and Wolong from Team Ninja here are that while they are very much so Souls-likes, at the same time, they're also kind of their own thing. I don't really think Souls-like when I play these games. And a lot of that is simply down to a variety of pretty deep systems that make the combat very interesting. We start off with a variety of weapon choices. Each weapon has 3 stances associated with it. Each stance has a speed and method of attack that can be then modified by skills you'll learn. You can earn skill points both by leveling up as well as becoming more proficient with certain weapons. You can also learn other techniques such as ninjutsu or the magic in this game, which is a word I can't pronounce, but that's before we even dive into the gear system on top of all of the various items that you can use to augment everything you're doing. And while for the sake of this impressions video, I'll spare you the details of, other than to say there's a lot of varied systems that are deep, and I'm roughly 15 hours into the game as of this recording, and I know for a fact I still haven't even hit all of the different systems. But gameplay-wise, we're going to be playing through various levels that we start and navigate through a map screen. There are main missions, of course, which advance the plot, but then this will open up sub-missions. There's a Twilight mission, which is a super hard variant of regular missions, alongside optional stuff like extra boss fights. And all of that adds up to a surprising amount of content because 15 hours in and I've just started the second area of what I believe are 6 of them, not counting the DLCs, which leads me to believe that combined with I believe the 4 New Game Plus modes is going to make this particular review take quite some time. Though it's my understanding the later New Game Pluses is more about grinding gear and simply building levels and loot up as opposed to advancing the plot. But a few things in particular I want to mention are the living weapon system. As we play through this game, we'll be picking up guardian spirits as we try to track down our original one, and these guardian spirits can be equipped, so to speak, and as we defeat enemies and perform well in combat, we can build up a meter that will then allow us to activate our living weapon mode, which then replaces our health and ki bar, which is stamina effectively, with this living weapon bar that then allows us to do a bunch of elemental damage, which is a lot of fun to play around with, and I like that system. I'll have more to say on that one in the review, but overall I think it's cool and it kind of makes you feel like a badass, which that in combination with all of the various weapon types and builds that you can already make that I can kind of see beginning here, seems like a really cool system with a lot of depth. But then that kind of bumps up against the fact the level design for this is sort of off, I would say. The levels themselves tend to be pretty small, but then you'll do things like open up shortcuts like every 5 seconds, but the levels are so small that they don't really need the shortcuts, but then there's only like 2 shrines that we can use to act as a checkpoint. And that makes running through the levels themselves just very, very awkward. Another thing for me personally is that games like this tend to have a big emphasis on the boss fights, and while I'm not even halfway through the game yet, I have fought several of them, and I will say that so far none of them have really captured me, I would say. Not to say that they aren't difficult or anything, they absolutely are, especially as I'm getting to grips with both the controls and learning the game itself at the same time, what to use, options, etc. It's just that a lot of these bosses feel like they have a very specific weakness, and if you're not exploiting that, you're going to have a bad time. For instance, there is a sort of vampire woman boss that will paralyze you pretty frequently if you fail your dodges, and while that's pretty difficult to deal with if you don't have the items or anything to deal with it, that boss is also incredibly weak to one particular talisman, which is the one that sets your fire guardian spirit on her, which for some reason stuns her for an incredibly long time. There was another lightning boss that I was having a lot of trouble with, but it turns out you can just stand under an awning where none of its lightning strikes can hit you, at which point you only have to dodge like 2 of its melee attacks before you just murder the thing. So the bosses have been very underwhelming thus far, so I'm hoping that improves as we go on. But to sum this up and keep it from dragging on too long, I would say my first impressions of Nioh are that it is a really great combat system surrounded by incredibly janky systems, like the way the narrative is handled on top of the level design, the bosses being kind of weird. You can definitely tell this is Nioh 1, and I say that because while I haven't played Nioh 2, that is the one everyone sings the praises of, but obviously I wanted to start with this one first, so we shall see how it goes. But going forward, as for reviewing this title, the things I'm going to keep my mind on are how in-depth these systems actually are. Do the mini New Game Pluses actually add anything to the experience outside of just a loot grind? And probably how the levels as well as the bosses evolve over the course of the game as well. Now, in terms of timing, Nioh is a game that is going to take me a significant amount of time to review, but starting the day after this goes live, so Friday, I will have more than a week almost entirely to myself where I can focus on doing almost nothing but this, which is exactly why I'm choosing to start this now, so hopefully it will not take me as long to get the video for this one out as it might otherwise. That is going to do it for me. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, or if you're looking forward to the review that is coming, then by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.